everybody, welcome back to day 20 of our 30 days of daily play challenge inside the daily play, a 365-day art journal to reignite your creative spark. And can I just say, I am so proud of you, everybody who's here. I know how hard it is to stick with any sort of challenge, and so the fact that you've made that commitment to play and that you are here and you're following along is huge. So I'm really proud of you, and I'm excited to introduce watercolor to you today. We've just spent the past few days learning calligraphy. Know that you can go back, and please do go back and practice those basic strokes as much as you can. But in the spirit of skill building, which is what the whole start here section of your journal is all about and what we've been working on, we are going to introduce watercolor and some of my favorite techniques and tools and ways to kind of get comfortable with a medium that might be completely new to you. So we're on page 23 of our book, and I just want to read day 20 to you, page 23, because it's going to kind of help set the tone for what it is that we're doing with watercolor. So in this journal, we're not going to be painting complex subjects. Did you just sigh in relief? But we will be adding colorful watercolor washes to our pages. To do that, we need to get a feel for that ever elusive paint to water ratio. The paper in this journal will hold up to watercolor washes. That is, thin layers of watercolor where you can still see the paper underneath. I recommend getting some cold press watercolor paper, and I have some recommendations in the art supply section at the beginning of your book. If this is your first time using watercolor, as there's understandably a learning curve when it comes to how much water to add to the page. For this exercise, for day 20, we're going to be creating graded washes that transition from dark to light using one color in your palette. For a darker value, use less water. For a lighter value, add more water. So I'll get into what I mean here in a second, because that is what we're doing for day 20. But I want to talk a little bit about materials. So if you missed it and you haven't already watched the Welcome to 30 Days of Daily Play video, I would recommend going back there to kind of get a full overview of supplies. But we talked about the daily play art kit. So this is the art kit that I have available still for pre-order. And it includes a travel watercolor palette, a paintbrush, the Sakura Micron permanent ink pen, the Tombow Fudenosuke brush pen. But the most important thing that I want to point out is the 140-pound watercolor paper pad that's also included in the bag. So this watercolor paper pad is for exactly this purpose, which is if you are just trying out watercolor for the very first time and you're a little bit worried maybe about creating puddles on the page, I would recommend having some extra watercolor paper, so that if you did get the art kit or if you're considering it, some extra paper for the next few days would be super, super helpful. And I do recommend 140-pound cold press watercolor paper. So if you want to write that down, or again, go back and watch that first video, I have an Amazon list also of supplies of different materials that I recommend, so you can check that out as well. But 140-pound cold press watercolor paper is going to be the best to practice on, to just sort of experiment with that graded wash and the paint to water ratio. Okay, so what do you need for our day 20 prompt inside of our journal? You need your watercolor paint palette. So this is the 12 color palette inside the Daily Play Art Kit, but you could use any watercolors that you have. These are called half pans, and so they have to be activated with water. You might have tubes, that's totally fine as well. If you have tube watercolor paint, just choose a couple of colors, put them on your palette. You're gonna have to activate those with water as well. So I would just want you to grab your watercolor palette, grab your round paintbrush. I recommend a size 4 to 6. This is a size 4, and it's our travel watercolor brush, so it collapses back inside the barrel, which is pretty cool. And you need a water cup. This is actually something I made in pottery class, which I love, but any water cup will do. One tip I will say is that you never want to leave your paintbrush inside your water cup, because it'll make your paintbrush bent like this, and we don't want that. So you want to get your paintbrush nice and wet. And then I just want you to choose a color in your palette. You can watch me do this first, but just think about what color you want to pick. You can watch me do this, and then I'll tag you in. I'm going to choose blue because it's right here and it's easy for you to see. And I'm getting the surface nice and wet. So when we're a beginner, we have a tendency to kind of gently tap around. I want your paintbrush to be nice and wet and to get every bristle loaded. That's a watercolor term. I want it to be loaded with color. So you can roll it around, make sure you have a nice puddle on top of that color here. And we're going to be creating graded washes. So you rarely would take a color directly from the palette onto the page. Typically, you need a mixing surface. So I recommend like a ceramic plate, or if you have this watercolor kit, there is a mixing surface right here. And you want that to be nice and juicy, full of pigment. So this is our darkest value, which means that is the lightness or the darkness of a color. So we want it to be the darkest value of this color. And my paintbrush is nice and loaded. The entire surface is nice and loaded, and I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4 back and forth strokes. Okay? It does not need to be a perfect square. Now, I still have paint on my paintbrush. All I'm going to do is add water to my paintbrush, tapping it off if it's dripping wet. And I'm going to touch the last stroke that I just made and doing another 4 strokes. Similar to a brush pen, you want to use the widest part of the paintbrush. So you want to apply pressure on the paintbrush. And we're going to do that again, tapping off so there's not tons of water on here, touching the last stroke. And the idea is that we want to get to the lightest value that we have. And I'm using, again, 140 pound cold press watercolor paper to practice, because I know that it's very difficult when you're first starting out to know that ever elusive paint to water ratio. And the goal is to get from darkest value to lightest value, because with watercolor, the whole beauty of it is that you can get the transparency in the color. So you don't have to add white to get a lighter value, you simply add water. So rarely will you ever be watercoloring with the darkest value of a color. Typically, you would be adding water directly to that color in a palette, so that you would end up, when you apply it to the page, you would end up with sort of this shade of value. Okay? So darkest value all the way to lightest value simply by adding water to your paintbrush. Another way that sometimes people refer to this is butter to tea. So I'll write butter here, butter, and then it's a scale all the way to tea. And this is super important to just know what your paint is capable of, what your brush is capable of. Again, you want to angle your brush like this so that you can activate the widest part of your brush. We're using a round paintbrush. This is a size 4. I recommend in the art supply section like a 4 to a 6 is ideal. But a round paintbrush is one of my favorites because you can get thin lines if you need them, but you can also get nice thick lines by applying pressure to those bristles. So let's say you don't have any extra watercolor paper yet, but you still want to experiment in your book. That's totally fine. But what I will say is when you're painting inside your book, you want to have a postcard or a sheet of paper that you're placing between the sheets. So as an example, you would play, if you were watercoloring here, you would place a postcard or something between the sheets so that it's not bleeding through, especially if you're new to watercolor. And I'm going to show you what that looks like when we do it directly inside your book. So again, our goal is to go from butter, which is our darkest value, adding water just to our paintbrush until we have our lightest value. So I'm going to show you again, and I'll just do blue again since it's right here. I take the color, the darkest value, into my mixing palette, and I'm just going to go back and forth a few times here. Adding water to my paintbrush, tapping it off. I'm not going back to get more paint at all. You can use a paper towel if you feel like it's dripping too much. And we're just going to keep painting until we can almost just see the paper. So you can see I'm already kind of at this tea state just by adding water to my paintbrush. If you have puddles on the page, you can use what's called a thirsty brush. So you want to rinse out all the color from your brush so that it's nice and clean. Have a piece of paper towel so you know that there's no paint left, and you can actually scoop up, using a thirsty brush, you can scoop up any puddles that you see on the page. Okay? So if you're using the tip of the brush, I just want to show you how different that will feel. The tip, you're only going to get this tiny little mark here, and it's going to be really hard to spread it out. So again, I want you to be activating the widest part of the brush, turning the brush at a 45-degree angle towards your desk, and just drag out that paint, adding water to your brush so that you are almost completely at the white of the page. As usual, I have a book underneath to support me, And you're going to do as I say, not as I do, I guess. Put a piece of paper or a postcard between the sheets so that you know that nothing's going to bleed through. And just a note, like anything, this takes practice. Just know that the more you try, the better you're going to get. If you don't have any extra watercolor paper yet, again, that's totally fine. The paper within your workbook, within your journal, is made to withstand light washes of watercolor. So as long as your paintbrush is not dripping wet and you place another piece of paper between the sheets, you are good to go. You're going to make sure that you wait until this page is dried completely before heading to your habit tracker. And then I will see you again tomorrow.